If you want to reach the absolute highest peak of human spiritual enlightenment, the first thing you really have to do is, well, take a nap.
Which, I mean, sounds like a complete joke,
Yeah,
but it is actually the entire core of what we are doing today.
right. It really is. Welcome to the deep dive, by the way. Today, we are taking a microscope to a single, incredibly dense paragraph from the Peaceful World Manifesto.
And for you listening, you might already know this document. It's usually known as this massive systemic blueprint for a whole new civilization.
Yeah, it covers literally everything: digital democracy, regenerative economics, all of that. But today,
Right.
we're completely ignoring all of that other stuff.
Exactly, because doing that allows us to, you know, isolate the actual engine of their entire philosophy. We are zeroing in exclusively on point number two.
Just point number two, which is titled Vertical Development.
Right. And it is exactly 3 sentences long. That's it. But the philosophical and the biological mechanics packed into those 3 sentences, they are basically meant to completely dismantle how we think about personal growth.
Which is great because I think a lot of us are just exhausted by the standard, skill stacking productivity advice out there.
Oh, totally. The endless lists of how to be better, faster, smarter.
Yeah. This text is just not interested in that horizontal skill acquisition at all. It is demanding a vertical structural collapse and rebuild of the human ego. So let's get right into the mechanics of it. The first sentence reads, quote, "We realize that biological existence is the foundation for the growth of consciousness," end quote.
We really have to stop immediately on that word, foundation.
Okay, let's unpack this because I know the original Russian text uses a very specific word here, right?
Yes, the word is fundament. It literally means the bedrock, like the physical concrete base upon which a structure absolutely relies to stand against gravity.
So it's not just like a starting point, it's a structural requirement.
Exactly. And this fundamentally severs ties with the traditional dualistic view that has, dominated Western philosophy for centuries.
Let me just stop you there for a second because we do hear about Cartesian dualism a lot on this show. But what is the actual mechanical implication of rejecting it here?
Well, Descartes basically argued that the mind and the body are made of completely different substances.
Right, that the mind is this immaterial floating thing and the body is just a mechanical machine.
Yeah. But if we reject that entirely, we are replacing it with strict biological dependency. Dualism allows for this sort of fantasy that your mind can just outthink your physical state.
Oh, right, like the whole mind over matter trope.
Precisely. And that idea birthed all those ascetic traditions where the body is viewed as a cage or something to be starved or beaten into submission so the soul can fly free.
Wow, yeah, that is pretty much the opposite of a foundation.
Right. This text looks at that whole history and says, no, your consciousness is an emergent property of your biology. Full stop.
So mechanically speaking, how does that actually play out in the body?
To understand the how, we really have to look at the brain's metabolism. The human brain consumes about 20% of the body's total energy.
Which is wild considering how small it is relative to the rest of the body.
It is. And the prefrontal cortex, that's the area responsible for empathy, long-term planning, moral reasoning, that part is the most metabolically expensive real estate in the entire brain.
Ah, okay, so if I'm understanding this right, consciousness isn't just floating in the ether. It's basically a high-drain application running on a physical, biological server.
That is a perfect way to put it. It's a high-drain app. So when your biological foundation is compromised,
Like if I pull an all-nighter or something.
exactly, through chronic sleep deprivation, systemic inflammation, or even just a really poor diet. When that happens, your body enters an energy conservation state.
It goes into low battery mode.
Right. And it quite literally cannot afford to power the prefrontal cortex anymore. Cortisol levels rise, your sympathetic nervous system kicks into survival mode, and your brain forcibly downregulates higher-order consciousness.
So you literally lose access to your better self.
You lose access to nuance. You lose access to deep empathy. Your consciousness literally shrinks because the biological foundation just cannot support its weight at that moment.
Man, if I look at modern corporate burnout culture through that lens, we are basically doing the exact opposite of what this text suggests.
Oh, we are actively degrading our biology to maximize output.
Yeah.
It's completely backward.
We skip sleep to hit deadlines. We eat absolute garbage to save time so we can, I don't know, answer 20 more emails. We are actually incentivized to destroy our own foundation.
Which is why we see so much systemic dysfunction.
Huh.
But I do want to address a common pushback here.
Yeah, go for it.
Some people hear this and say, wait, isn't that just biological determinism?
Right. Like, if my ability to be a good person is entirely dependent on my biology, doesn't that strip away my free will? Can't I just choose to be good?
That is the exact friction this manifesto is introducing. It is not saying you have no free will. It is saying your free will has a strict caloric budget.
A caloric budget. I love that phrasing.
Yeah, I mean, you can absolutely choose to be patient with a really difficult colleague. But if you haven't slept in 2 days, the biological cost of that patience might just exceed your available resources.
So the text isn't giving you an excuse for bad behavior.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It is assigning you the ultimate responsibility for maintaining your biological state so that you can afford to make those good choices.
Which leads us perfectly into the second sentence of the text. It says, quote, "The body is a temple of dignity. Caring for it is ethics." End quote.
And this is where the text completely flips the script on us.
It really does, because normally society defines ethics entirely externally. Like, ethics is how I vote, how much I donate to charity, how I treat my neighbor.
Right. It is almost always outward facing.
Yeah. But to define caring for your own body as a literal ethical mandate, I have to push back a little here. Doesn't that sound almost, I don't know, dangerously selfish?
How so?
Well, we live in a culture that already heavily commodifies self-care. It is like a $10 billion industry of bubble baths, expensive matcha lattes, luxury wellness retreats. How does getting 8 hours of sleep elevate to the level of a moral duty? It just feels like the ultimate excuse to focus entirely on myself.
This raises an important question, actually. But it only sounds selfish if you fundamentally misunderstand what a temple is actually designed to do.
Okay, break that down for me.
Think about the architecture of a temple historically. It is not built to be a private fortress for the ego. A temple isn't a gated community.
Right, it's usually a public or sacred space.
Exactly. It is built to have something sacred, to be conduit between the earthly and the divine, and ultimately to serve the community that relies on it.
Ah, so it's a vessel.
Yes. By calling the body a temple of dignity, the text elevates it from just a meat suit to a required vessel for higher consciousness.
So it really isn't about vanity at all. It has literally nothing to do with having a six-pack or glowing skin.
None whatsoever. We really have to separate the modern consumerist version of self-care from the structural maintenance this manifesto is demanding.
Okay, so let's look at the mechanism of ethics here.
Right. If your body is the server that runs your consciousness, and if the ultimate goal of your consciousness is to solve complex world-scale problems, then destroying your body in the name of the hustle is a moral failure.
Because you are sabotaging the very instrument required to do good in the world.
Exactly. You are breaking the tool the world needs you to use.
It's like treating yourself with the same rigorous, unsentimental care that a civil engineer treats a suspension bridge. The engineer doesn't maintain the bridge because the bridge is pretty,
Right, aesthetics have nothing to do with it.
The engineer maintains the bridge because 1 million people need to drive across it safely every single day. If they let the steel rust because they are too busy to do maintenance, that isn't just sloppy. That is a massive ethical violation.
And that reframing is profound, isn't it? If you burn yourself out, you are physically robbing the collective of your fully actualized potential.
So self-harm or self-neglect becomes a structural ethical failure.
Yes. You maintain the cup, not so you can admire the cup, but because you are morally obligated to pour from it.
Man, that is powerful. And it locks us directly into the core engine of this entire paragraph. The text states, quote, "We protect the body to ensure the possibility of vertical development."
And we really need to drill down into what vertical development actually is, because this isn't just about reading more books or going to therapy.
No, it's a completely different paradigm.
Right. To understand vertical development, we have to contrast it with horizontal development.
Which is basically what we are all used to, right?
Exactly. Horizontal development is what our entire educational and corporate systems are built upon. It is the acquisition of new skills, new data, new competencies.
Like learning how to code or learning Mandarin.
Yeah, or figuring out how to manage a larger team. When you do those things, you are developing horizontally. You are broadening your base of knowledge. But the actual lens through which you view reality remains exactly the same.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I have an analogy for the listener that might help crystallize this.
Let's hear it.
Think of horizontal development like taking a 2D flat map of the world and just adding more and more detail to it. You draw in every single river, every street, every coffee shop. You possess a massive amount of data, but the map is still fundamentally flat.
It's just a very crowded 2D map.
Right. But vertical development is taking that flat map and turning it into a 3D globe. The data doesn't just increase, the dimensional rules of reality change entirely. You can suddenly perceive depth, rotation, gravity. You realize the flat map was a functional illusion.
That dimensional shift is exactly what psychologists like Robert Keegan talk about when they discuss adult meaning-making. Vertical development is the evolution of the actual way you make sense of the world.
It's not just downloading a new app, it's upgrading the entire operating system.
Yes, an OS upgrade.
Yeah.
But I want to draw your attention back to a specific word in the text. Notice it says we protect the body to ensure the possibility of vertical development.
Oh, right. It doesn't guarantee it. Just
Right.
because you eat organic kale and sleep 8 hours a night doesn't mean you automatically become an enlightened being.
Precisely. And this explains why the biological foundation is so deeply critical. Upgrading your psychological operating system is agonizing work.
Because you're basically destroying your old worldview.
Yes, it requires you to look at your comfortable 2D map, realize it is completely insufficient, and let it collapse. And neurologically speaking, this involves immense synaptic pruning.
Meaning you actually have to rewire the brain physically.
You have to literally dissolve old neural pathways and construct entirely new ones to process higher complexity. That physical rewiring is incredibly metabolically expensive.
It takes a ton of energy.
A massive surplus of biological energy. If your body is barely surviving on coffee and stress, your brain will reject the OS update. It will cling to the 2D map because it simply does not have the biological runway to build the 3D globe.
That makes so much sense. You literally cannot undergo a major system update while your battery is flashing red at 2%.
The hardware just won't allow it.
Okay, so assuming we have the battery power, what are the actual stages of this update? Because the text lays out a very specific evolutionary trajectory.
Yes, it charts a very clear path.
It says, quote, "The evolution of consciousness from ego-centrism," end quote. So we have to start at stage 1, which is ego-centrism.
But we have to be careful here. We can't just define egocentrism as being a selfish jerk.
Right, it's not a moral judgment in this context, is it?
No, we have to look at it strictly through the lens of evolutionary biology. Egocentrism is the baseline, factory-installed operating system of human consciousness.
It's the default setting.
Exactly. It is the stage where the self is the absolute, unquestioned center of reality. Every incoming piece of data is filtered through one single question. How does this affect my survival, my status, and my comfort?
But biologically speaking, that is a totally necessary starting point, isn't it?
It is an absolute biological mandate. Think about human infancy. A baby is perfectly egocentric because it is perfectly vulnerable.
Right, a baby's brain is wired to scream for food at 3 in the morning.
And it does not possess the neurological hardware to care that its parents are exhausted and have to work the next day. If an infant actually had empathy, if it prioritized the needs of the tribe over its own caloric requirements, it would die.
That's a brutal but fair point. Empathy is deadly if you can't feed yourself.
The infant brain is literally structured to prioritize immediate caloric needs and physical safety above all abstract concepts. The amygdala, our threat detection center, is fully online, while the prefrontal cortex is basically just starting to form.
Okay, so egocentrism isn't a moral failing in its native context. It's an evolutionary survival tool. It is the cocoon.
Yes.
But the text obviously treats it as a stage we absolutely must evolve from. Why is it so dangerous to stay there?
What's fascinating here is the mismatch between our evolutionary hardware and our modern leverage.
Leverage. What do you mean by that?
Well, an infant running an egocentric operating system is harmless because an infant has zero physical or social power. They can't do any damage.
Sure.
But what happens when you take a grown human being who is still running that exact same egocentric software, someone who still filters all reality strictly through what benefits me, and you hand them adult leverage?
Huh.
You give them a massive bank account, a car, a multinational corporation, or, a nuclear arsenal.
Right. They become a localized natural disaster.
Exactly. The central crisis of modern humanity is that we possess godlike, world-altering technology. But our institutions and our leaders are largely still operating on the emotional and cognitive software of a toddler.
That is terrifying when you put it like that.
When you have the capacity to impact thousands of lives, but your dimensional map only allows you to see your own immediate needs, you generate massive systemic suffering.
It's unavoidable.
The text is pointing out that if we remain stuck in egocentrism while wielding adult power, we will inevitably destroy ourselves. The system cannot sustain it.
But if staying in egocentrism with adult power is a fatal flaw, then the system has to force an update. The brain has to expand its processing power to include the tribe and, eventually, the entire system.
Which brings us to the next massive leap in the text trajectory.
Right, the text moves from egocentrism, quote, to world-centrism.
And moving to world-centrism is a staggering cognitive leap. I cannot overstate how difficult this is.
It's not just deciding to be a nicer person, right?
No, this is not just caring more. This is expanding the actual boundary of what you consider self to encompass the entire globe. You move beyond your immediate family, you move beyond your political party, you even move beyond your nation state.
You begin to hold the complex reality of ecosystems you will never physically see and people you will never actually meet.
Yes. And let's explore the sheer cognitive load of that for a second. Has you ever talked about Dunbar's number on the show?
Oh yeah, the anthropology concept. The idea that the human brain evolved to only maintain stable, meaningful social relationships with about 150 people.
Right. That was roughly the size of our ancestral tribes. Our brains are physically, literally wired to care deeply about those 150 people and to treat everyone else as an abstraction or a potential threat.
So to shift to world-centrism means you are actively overriding millions of years of deeply ingrained evolutionary conditioning.
You are fighting your own evolutionary biology, which is exactly why it is so difficult and why that biological foundation we talked about earlier must be incredibly strong.
Because holding all that empathy takes energy.
Enormous amounts of neurological energy. To truly care about the supply chain of the clothes you wear or the long-term climate impact of your local policies, your brain has to hold massive conflicting variables simultaneously without just shutting down in panic.
And this is where the rubber band effect comes in, isn't it? I see this happen all the time.
What do you mean by the rubber band effect?
Well, people have genuine world-centric ideals. They care about humanity, they recycle, they vote for human rights. But the moment their own biological or economic foundation is threatened, say, they lose their job, or they go through a period of extreme stress and sleep deprivation, their consciousness snaps back like a rubber band right back to egocentrism.
That is the biological override in real time. When the threat detection system activates, the brain defunds the prefrontal cortex to send energy to the muscles and the amygdala.
It's like, forget the ozone layer, I need to survive.
Exactly. You literally lose the neurological capacity for world-centrism. You stop caring about the abstract global whole, and you start hoarding toilet paper or fighting your neighbor for basic resources.
You regress.
You regress entirely. And this proves the manifesto's central point. You simply cannot sustain a world-centric worldview on a collapsing biological foundation.
Man, if we look at the macro level today, our global systems are crashing because of this exact tension.
Yeah.
We have built a totally interconnected global economy, and we are facing a global climate reality. These are inherently world-centric systems.
Yes, and they require world-centric operating systems to manage them.
But we are trying to manage them with egocentric incentive structures. We are trying to solve global world-centric crises with politicians and CEOs who are rewarded solely for maximizing short-term, localized, egocentric gains.
It is a structural impossibility. You cannot solve a 3D problem with a 2D map. This is exactly why the manifesto demands vertical development as a matter of survival. We have to build minds capable of holding the complexity of the world.
Which means we have to build bodies capable of fueling those minds. It all comes back to the foundation. Now, for most people listening, world-centrism probably sounds like the absolute pinnacle. Like, if everyone just cared about the whole world, boom, utopia achieved, right?
You would think so, but the text does not stop there at all.
No, it pushes into a final, frankly radical frontier. It says, quote, and self-transcendence, moving beyond the ego to serve life, end quote. We really need to spend a lot of time here because self-transcendence is one of those terms that gets thrown around in spiritual circles a lot, but the actual mechanics of it are deeply counterintuitive.
It is critical to differentiate self-transcendence from world-centrism because they are absolutely not the same thing.
Okay, walk me through the difference.
In world-centrism, you have expanded your empathy to include the whole world. You care about the environment, you care about global poverty, but you are still you caring about it.
Right. The ego is still intact. It has just grown very large and very benevolent.
Exactly. You still see yourself as the hero of the story, out to save the world.
Like, I'm a good person because I care about the planet. The core identity is still firmly anchored in the self.
Yes. But self-transcendence is the functional dissolution of that central I.
Dissolution. That sounds intense.
It is the realization that you are not the protagonist of reality. You are not the hero. You are simply a localized node of biology and consciousness. You step outside of the ego entirely.
So you're not doing good deeds for the dopamine hit anymore.
No. You are no longer acting because it makes you feel good or because it builds your personal legacy or even because it proves your moral purity to others. You act because the action is what the system structurally requires.
Think about the implications of that for a second. If you achieve self-transcendence, you are completely free from the metabolic burden of defending your own identity.
And that burden is massive.
It's huge. Think about how much energy we waste every single day just defending our ego. We argue on the internet to prove we are right. We buy things to signal our status. We obsess over how we are perceived by people we don't even like.
It's exhausting.
If all of that identity maintenance is just dropped, the amount of processing power freed up in the human brain would be staggering.
And what does the text say you do with all that freed up processing power?
It says you use it to serve life.
Notice that life in the original text is capitalized.
Hmm.
It is not talking about biological life in the sense of just, keeping your own heart beating.
Right, it's a bigger concept.
It is referring to life as the grand, unfolding, anti-entropic force of the universe, the evolutionary drive toward greater complexity, greater harmony, and greater consciousness.
So what does this all mean in practice? Because serving life isn't just an abstract, warm, spiritual feeling. It sounds highly functional. It sounds almost like becoming infrastructure.
It is the ultimate functional alignment. When you transcend the self to serve life, you literally become an instrument.
An instrument.
Yes. Think about a scalpel. A scalpel doesn't have an ego. It doesn't worry about whether the other surgical tools respect it. It just cuts exactly where the surgeon needs it to cut. A transcendent consciousness does what is required for the flourishing of the biosphere and the collective, completely, regardless of whether it brings personal glory.
I have to play devil's advocate here, because becoming an instrument sounds dangerously close to losing your humanity entirely. If you dissolve the ego, do you just become this emotionless robot serving some grand biological algorithm? Where's the joy in that?
You're hitting on the core fear that keeps most people anchored in ego-centrism. The ego basically terrifies us into believing that without it, we are nothing.
Right, it says, if I don't exist as a special individual, I don't exist at all.
But self-transcendence isn't a lobotomy. It isn't the erasure of your personality, your sense of humor, or your unique capacities. It is actually the liberation of them.
How so?
Because the joy doesn't disappear. It just ceases to be fragile. In egocentrism, your joy is entirely dependent on external validation. You need things to go your way. In self-transcendence, your joy comes from the frictionless alignment with the reality of your existence.
You aren't fighting the current anymore.
Exactly. You're no longer fighting the current of life to build your own little dam. You become the current.
Man, if we pull all the way back and look at the entirety of these three sentences, the architecture is absolutely brilliant. It is a completely closed, recursive loop of care and evolution.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really is a perfect loop. Walk us through the trajectory we just mapped out.
Okay, so you start at the base level, right, with the raw biological body. The manifesto demands that you elevate the care of that biology to a profound ethical duty, treating it as a literal temple.
All right.
And why? Because you are morally obligated to generate the immense surplus of metabolic energy required to upgrade your brain.
Yes.
Then you use that biological foundation to trigger the agonizing process of vertical development. You break out of the evolutionary default of egocentrism, where you only care about your own survival.
Force the upgrade.
You force the brain to hold the massive cognitive load of world-centrism, where you care for the entire globe. And then, at the absolute peak of this mountain, you use all that evolved consciousness to drop the ego entirely, achieving self-transcendence.
And what happens when you finally achieve self-transcendence?
You turn around and serve life.
Exactly. You protect the very biological foundation that started the whole process. Biology builds the mind takes responsibility for upgrading itself, and the upgraded mind turns back around to serve the biological reality of the whole planet.
It is a life-evolving consciousness so that consciousness can protect life.
It's beautiful.
It really takes the most mundane acts of daily living and infuses them with this structural, almost cosmic significance. And for you, listening right now, This is where the theory hits the pavement of your actual Tuesday afternoon. This isn't just an abstract philosophical exercise to sound smart at dinner parties.
No, it is a highly practical blueprint for your daily operations.
Exactly. I want to remind you that your daily choices, like how you manage your sleep tonight, how you regulate your nervous system when someone cuts you off in traffic tomorrow, how you feed your physical body, these are not chores. They're not just productivity hacks so you can grind harder at your corporate job.
They are the foundation.
According to this text, they are the vital, indispensable prerequisites for morality. You literally cannot be the person you want to be if your hardware is collapsing. You are tending the hardware so the software can evolve.
And as we close out this analysis, I want to leave you with a final mechanical question to really sit with.
Go ahead.
If vertical development is the true evolution of consciousness, and it ultimately requires leaving that 2D map of the ego behind to reach self-transcendence, you have to look honestly at what is holding you down right now.
What's draining the battery?
Exactly. Ask yourself, what is one specific ego-driven desire, perhaps a need to always be the smartest person in the room, or a desperate need for external recognition, or even a resentment you are meticulously feeding every day that is burning up your metabolic energy right now?
That's a heavy question.
What is the anchor keeping you from generating the energy required to step into your own world-centric potential?
An uncomfortable question, for sure, but an absolutely necessary one if you actually want to upgrade the system. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We took 3 simple sentences and unpacked the entire evolutionary mechanics hidden inside them.
It was quite the journey.
Keep interrogating your own operating system, pay close attention to where your energy is actually going, and above all, treat your biological foundation with the rigorous dignity it demands. We will catch you on the next deep dive.